Welcome back to Contest Prep University. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Adam Atkinson. And have to apologize again for anybody viewing this. I think my computer is a little laggy again. Thought I had that resolved. But the audio should be fine. And if you don't mind a little half-second delay, as long as that doesn't give you seizures or anything, just look away if so. But we want to talk about something that I think is going to be very useful to a lot of competitors, starting a bit of a series that has high utility, very specific points we want to educate our viewers regarding in terms of how you actually look on contest day. And this one is going to be, why can't I get as tight on contest day as previous days? And you're going to run into a lot of elements that we talk about pretty constantly: hydration, minerals, carbs, how you actually flow all of the variables of peak week up into contest day. So there is certainly a list. We're going to keep it as short and concise as possible. But Adam, I mean, I know as a coach, like that's still the first thing I want to know on contest day. As soon as you wake up, send me photos. How do you feel? How do you look? What was your weight? So we can compare that to possible fluid dynamics over the past 24 hours, how you compare to the day before and 2 days before. And then we have to start putting the puzzle together. If we're seeing something that we like, how do we maintain that? How do we progress it for the next few hours before the stage? If we see something that we think we need to fine tune or adjust, how do we make that decision? Which direction do we go? What if somebody's not quite as tight? What if they're tight but super, super flat? So again, a lot of pieces of the puzzle we have to start constructing. And for me, it starts with context. When you know what you've been doing up to that point, you know how protein, carbs, and fats, how water, how sodium, how other minerals have been executed day to day up to that point, you can at least get an idea of what possibilities could be prioritized. Out of a list of 5 or 6 things we may talk about today, in your context, what's the first thing to consider? So I'll let you go first here, Adam, with answering that question. What do you consider? What are the first things you're looking at if a person wakes up on contest day and they're just not quite as tight as they have been in the previous couple of days?
Yeah. So if they wake up and they're not as tight first thing in the morning, that's usually a little bit of a red flag because that's usually when they're going to be their tightest. So, there's going to be things that fall into that. Sometimes sleeping in a hotel room doesn't work great for people. It is nice to ask those things. A lot of times the client will just tell you, I slept horrible last night. A lot of clients even know that, but those are kind of things that you can't fix. And at that point in time, you don't want a knee jerk reaction because it's been there the rest of the week. There's also tanning and lighting changes. Sometimes I might have them move into different lighting, but usually at that point, I just have them get their first meal in. And I might have them send an additional set of photos versus, hey, let's go to meal two. So oftentimes clients can tell when things aren't going as planned. I'm going to be checking in with them a lot more frequently at that point and making sure that they stay on. The first thing that comes to mind is water. It's the fastest, as long as carbs were consistent and we didn't do anything way different the night before, water and sodium are going to usually be my first go-to. We also have to consider show day stress in general. That could be an aldosterone response. And then we can even use activity to drive where fluid goes too. So, maybe someone just needs to de-stress a little bit. So a little bit of a morning walk or even just a pump up after the first meal, a light pump up could be really helpful for just making that physique bounce back.
Mm. Yeah, you laid out almost all of the variables here. So I want to backtrack into your first one, which was incredibly important. I often consider something like sleep quality and just the process of you're in a new environment, you probably traveled. There's definitely some adrenaline occurring. Those are almost intangible. You said it correctly that you really can't fix those. And as much as I would say they're intangible, they're tangible. Like they're real physiological responses. So we have to try to adjust for it, but it's definitely going to be outside of the norm of just, hey, let's add some water, sodium, let's do this, let's do that. So, first of all, to try to prevent that, I know clients will often try to get to a contest site a day or two earlier than just necessary. Instead of flying in the day before the show, they're there 2 or 3 days ahead of time, trying to relax, get accustomed to the, surroundings, the food. But you're also possibly just changing a lot of non-exercise activity. You could be increasing or decreasing that depending on what you're doing in that particular city. You have to account for that. Um, Maybe using a little sports psychology in just how do I keep myself calm? How do I keep adrenaline and anxiety lower? Those kind of things. The night before a show, I don't know anybody who sleeps great, but I also am not aware if any particular uh, proactive strategy is helpful. Like, what if somebody took a little Xanax or just Tylenol PM, something to help them sleep? Like, I don't know if that would create any kind of a backlash in their physique, their homeostasis physiologically. So I'm a little leery of that. But all I can say is, do your best, get enough sleep, try to get in that routine. But if you do wake up a little bit less than tight, because you rightly said, Adam, like that should be your tightest. You have to consider where that's coming from. So I want to go back to one of the things you said about activity. If somebody is holding a little bit of subcutaneous fluid, um, give me a list in your mind what that could be. Like why would they wake up a little bit watery or a little bit softer when they should have been their tightest?
Yeah. So stress is definitely a factor. Um, Sodium and water definitely being some big drivers there. Um, let's see, what else would we have there? It would be e even just like, like sleep would be huge. If they didn't sleep well, they're not going to dissipate through that meal, like maybe that final meal as well as they would have. And that's one thing I kind of wanted to bring up too is when you have girls who are doing 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. makeup times, they might not be as tight and you just have to wait it out because, their usual 6 a.m. wake up look isn't going to come until like 3 hours later.
And I would say, if at all, because a lot of competitors will relate to this. Like, let's say in a normal day, 2 weeks prior, you just wake up at 4 or 5, you go to the bathroom, you take a look at yourself, you go back to bed and sleep for 2 hours. You wake up and you're just way tighter. Just those extra couple hours of sleep where you are releasing a lot of stored water in your body through just respiration and through just another couple hours of the very, very indistinguishable light perspiration that happens, throughout your entire skin as an organ. So I do agree that sometimes you just need to wait and get in the flow. Like as soon as you start moving, one of the biggest things, and it's so obvious that it might almost be overlooked, is that you could be a little overcarbed. Like maybe your carbohydrate loading strategy went a step too far and you wake up a little watery. If you did something extreme, and this is where knowing your context is critical, like let's say you just tripled your carbs a day prior or 2 days prior, and now your weight is up 3 or 4 pounds and you're a little watery, you're likely spilled over. If your weight is lower or the same, and you really didn't have a massive carb up, you're just a little filmy, maybe it's not spillover, maybe it's what we're describing here, stress, that kind of thing. Um, but I love that you went to two things separately. One is we may need to move a little bit, get a little training, get something, start driving the need for glucose and water manipulation internally through muscle tissue movement. And then also what you consume, like maybe just the first meal, sodium, water, maybe that starts drawing things back into the muscle tissue. So let's start with the movement thing first. You mentioned taking a walk. And we know that tanning products and those early morning appointments you're describing can have an impact of what we can do. But is there a way? Do you often ask a client, like, let's actually get a few sets in? Like, can you go to the hotel gym? Is there a gym nearby where we get a 30-minute light workout? Does that have any value on contest morning, Adam?
Yeah, definitely. For a couple different reasons. I like to see if my clients can even feel like they are getting a pump. And that data can be more monumental than anyone might realize. If there's one thing we learned during the pandemic, it's we can certainly get a pump with bands. And for a lot of people who thought they couldn't, it's because the only time they use bands on contest day where they jacked up their peak week by depleting sodium and water. So I do sometimes have my clients just do a banded workout because I know they can keep the temperature in the room the way they want it, not overly sweat, and just tell them hit like a 5 to 7 minute pump up. Let me know how that pump up feels. Does it feel dull? Does it, did you feel pumped? And send some photos. Let's see how you look. And if they still look a little flat and they feel like that pump didn't do anything, sodium's usually going to be my move, always with a side of water, but the sodium is usually a key missing component if people are kind of feeling that way or seeing those things.
Mm. And the reason I started with movement is that is a very controllable aspect of how we can affect change pretty quickly. I think you need a couple hours for this, but let's assume somebody is just lightly spilled over or for some reason lack of sleep, stress, they just have that little filminess of water. All of your muscle tissue combined, 60, 70, 80 pounds of skeletal muscle on your body, just depending on your body size, uh, you know, you start using some glycogen, you start moving, you start using multiple muscle groups, large muscle groups, your back, your legs, your, shoulders, arms. That's going to create a need or a use of that stored glycogen and then a need for replacement. That creates that glycogen turnover. And so then whatever you are using, like let's say you go through a 5 to 7 minute workout, as you said, or even 20 to 30 minutes and all of a sudden, you're going to trigger, speaking of aldosterone, a response where, okay, that glycogen is now being used a little bit. And so the associated stored water with it is going to be released. You're going to find yourself urinating more. And all of a sudden, it's like maybe you've only had 32 ounces of water. You feel like you've urinated out twice that. Well, that's a good indication that now you're using and losing some of that filminess in that stored water. Then, per your point, Adam, you have a meal, maybe increase sodium a little bit. Now that glucose, even though it's just the beginning part of glycogen synthesis, it at least is starting to happen. And we know water follows solute, so the glucose starting to become muscle glycogen. The water is going to follow into the muscle tissue. Sodium is a transport for that, so that's going to help. And I mean, you've seen so many PowerPoint presentations I've done. You've seen photos from your own clients, how quickly you can change in just 1 to 2 hours, sometimes in 10 to 15 minutes. And
Mhm.
so just that movement alone can start that process and can be almost diagnostic. If all of a sudden you find yourself now getting tighter and tighter and tighter and fuller, you'll realize, okay, I just needed to move a little bit. I needed to get my muscle tissue kind of absorbing some new glucose and water, and that can help that process that then you can continue forward. Let me ask you one pointed question because you are kind of the king at using sodium in a targeted strategic way. So 20, 25, 30 years ago, when I started telling the industry, stop depleting sodium. Sodium is your friend. Sodium is required for muscle tissue to absorb water. I think I was too conservative even back then. I was onto something, but I didn't realize how powerful it could be. Now that it's easier, where you have electrolyte packets with sodium, magnesium, potassium, those kind of things, you can dose it very specifically. I think it has become a much wider used tool. So if somebody is not quite as tight as they want to be, and we've established that movements can be a factor, now moving into using sodium for filling up a muscle group or muscle tissue in general, how does that make somebody tighter, Adam?
Yeah, so the sodium actually helps you pull more water into the muscle tissue, which will create more muscle fullness. So that's the key reason why we use that. Now, if you use too much, you can get an aldosterone shift that's negative and you can hold some water. So balance is key. But I am on kind of the standpoint as you as I've used more and more over the years, and I've seemed to be successful with using more. Um, a little bit can make a big difference on somebody's physique. And I've had clients who are amazed. Some clients are really blind to the peaking process, but you have some of those people who, get it and they see it. They can kind of be objective and see the changes a little bit better. And they're like, wow, I can't believe how much tighter I feel, or even just like the difference in the pump I felt. If they come back and they're like, that pump was dull, let's do this in about 20 more minutes. They're like, wow, just that little bit of salt made a big difference in how my pump up went.
Mhm. And so again, coming back to context, yeah, it really does depend on you knowing what your sodium levels have been leading up to that day, knowing what is innately in the food you're consuming versus any added sodium condiments, that sort of thing. But I'll give you an example. Back in the day, if I go back 20 years ago and you started seeing my clients eating pizza backstage, as I would tell them then, like the reason I'm having you do this is first of all a very measured amount, but the sodium from the pizza is going to hit you first, then some of the simple carbs, then some of the fat, which is carb sparing, will help sustain and elongate that process. But make no mistake, we're getting the initial sodium from that. And maybe just my that those were just the first steps in this evolution. But I remember one time when I was helping Lane Norton win his first pro card. I mean, this goes back 20 some years. And I literally asked him, he was at a point where he was a little flat. And I said, well, we need some sodium. Do you have any pizza? Do you have anything around? And he was on the phone with me standing on the street. And he said, no, but there's a Subway. And so I said, yes, like if you get a half a sub sandwich, you're going to get over 1,000 milligrams of sodium. Definitely do that. So he went and he ate a sub, and just of course he blew up in a good way, right? Like muscle tissue, much fuller, super tight. So I think for years and years and years, he had his clients all get like Subway subs on contest day. So we all had our little Wade Boggs kind of superstitions and moments, like we would use this food or that food for those reasons: sodium, carbs, fat. Now, I just think it's kind of silly not to use a much more specific pathway. So we've even, Adam, I think, you probably started the whole craze of using pickles, having a handful of potato chips or this or that. Again, sodium, sodium, sodium. But you can also just use table salt. You've used Morton's light salt because it has potassium. I'm starting to get into some of the electrolyte packets because of the mineral base plus the balance of sodium potassium just innately. And I know exactly I can say if you take this, it's 250 milligrams of sodium. If you do this, it's 500. If you do this, it's 1,000. So it's a lot more specific. But those are the ways, as you described, that you get the muscle tissue more hydrated. So we're pulling water where we want it. So if you're a little filmy and you use that sodium as a transport for intracellular water, I know this sounds crazy to anybody who's just done the old school, like eliminate sodium kind of thing and eliminate water, this podcast probably isn't for you. You won't believe it until you try it. But staying hydrated and then using sodium to direct where that water goes into the muscle, you still have to know the amounts and be specific, but that is the way to get to your fullest and your tightest. But what about carbs? Is there any play? Somebody wakes up, they're a little filmy. Um, like, would you say, okay, maybe because of that filminess, you look a little watery? Maybe we need to delay a meal. Maybe we need to add food. Maybe we need like how do you then handle food?
Yeah, I might do a sustainment meal where it's like a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat. My clients are prepared for every scenario. So I usually give them about 4 meals that they're to pack on show day. And 2 of those meals they pack twice. For the lengths of the shows this year, that has seemed to be enough for even the longest shows. And it gives us some flexibility for making some changes to those meals. So if somebody's a little filmy, I'm definitely going to be cautious on food because aside from the sodium that's riding in on that food, it's probably not going to immediately change the physique. But we do have to be realistic with hunger levels and what someone can sustain. And we do have to consider our athletes are still performing on stage. You know, they're pumping up, they're posing. So they do need to be fueled in a way, especially if they're a fitness competitor. That's kind of an interesting topic in itself because they have the physique round too. So you know, you do need to have enough for decent performance as well to a degree.
Hmm. I love what you said there, a sustainment meal. Um, Again, if you wake up a little filmy, you just have to consider maybe you're a little spilled over, meaning you've got extra glucose, extra glycogen. Maybe you just cross that line a little bit. So we started with maybe you need to move more, do a few sets, do something. When I've had a client that had the ability because of their tanning regimen and things like that to actually sweat a little bit, like maybe they don't have any base color and they're just going to use Dream Tan later in the morning. And I've been able to get people in a gym and literally sweat and work out, then getting those subcutaneous sweat glands emptied out. Then they get their first meal, their metabolism is up, their body temperature's up, their muscle tissue is now ready to receive more glucose. Talk about an incredible way to get super tight and super full, but not everybody has that luxury, again, because of tanning and makeup and so forth. So to go to the other end and say, okay, we can't work out that hard, but we definitely need to give your body a chance to use some of this energy. So let's just drop carbs from the first meal. You're still getting protein, you're still getting a little fat, you're getting some sodium. Let's see how you look an hour or two after that. That could be a complete game changer. Like that could tighten them right back up, and now you're on track and you can resume your plan as you did. Um, any other individual factors that you think, Adam, come into play? Like if that's your client and they woke up and all the things we've already talked about, you're kind of going through the checklist. Is there anything else that we're leaving out that you think could help them tighten back up?
Not necessarily. I think we've nailed the physiology. Always keep into consideration that sometimes tan darkens overnight depending on the company, and you're usually dealing with a darker physique in the morning, which can make you not look as tight. So, um, just for assessment purposes, you know, have good lighting, teach people to take you know, the lampshade off of their, you know, off of their, nightstand lamp if they need to get some really extreme lighting on the physique. That can help your eye a little bit because your coaching is only going to be as good as what you can see.
Mm. You know, you made me think of also as we're going through these last final details, you know, the body is very much just a series of physics type reactions. And so as we're talking about moving and maybe restricting some carbs and adding a little sodium, don't forget to spend some time lying down also because of the lymphatic system. And so you're going to be excreting maybe some water through urination, which is going to, be the result of you tightening up. But also you need to get that fluid into the vascular system through the lymph system. And that may mean, some alternating of moving and working out and walking and lying down and then moving and walking and then lying down and so forth. So very much like a pump. But I would also say back to the fact that movement can be helpful for body temperature and even that just indiscernible amount of perspiration. I also find that through that tanning process, whether it's just a little irritation of the skin, a little kind of autoimmune reaction, like people often do look a little filmy just from the tan. And it's not carb spilling over. It's not anything else. It's not stress. It's not sleep. Like it can be just the application of the tan for a couple days in a row. And so that means, again, you may have the subcutaneous sweat glands a little bit full from that edema type reaction. And that's where just a little bit of movement, a little bit of increase in body temperature will at least start to get rid of that. And that's why a little bit of that training in the morning can help. I'm sure you've had clients who weren't on stage at all till like their class is at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. So they've had much more time during the day. And don't they always end up looking just a little better, a little tighter because of the extra movement throughout the day?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, man. Anything else to cover while I got you here, Adam?
I think just keeping stress low, with the laying down and getting everything in the lymphatic system, definitely trying to stay as relaxed as possible. It's really easy to be a little bit of a diva on show day and worry about everything, but like your biggest thing to worry about is just being on time. And as long as your appointments go smoothly, it's one of the better reasons to book with host, makeup, and tan, because if they're behind, they're going to delay the show. If you're working with third party companies, and not saying that they're not great, but if they're not on time, that could put you in a debacle because they don't have any control over when and how soon they get you to the stage.
Exactly. Well, great stuff, Adam. This is such a good topic. I think I'm going to suggest we talk about this with our D1 club. For those of you who have not heard, we do have a private group, our Contest Prep University D1 Club. We meet every couple of weeks. We have a group where we chat just nonstop, some peer-to-peer support, as well as our entire staff. I know it's a massive, massive paywall of $3 a month, but for somebody who doesn't have a coach or somebody who is coached, but you just want another pair of eyes, what a great service. We've got so many people who are happy in that group, and I'm kidding, of course, with a quote massive $3 paywall. I think that's a pretty small price to pay for those who find that extra attention valuable. Specifically, a topic like this, Adam, myself, Austin Kiergaard, Dr. Souders, our medical director, will often take this and with the Contest Prep University D1 Club members specifically talking about their process and their experience, or maybe their contest coming up the next week, it allows us to help you apply these principles to exactly what you need. So message us if you have any questions about that, and we will see you guys next time in Contest Prep University.